Hey NorthPoint students, welcome to home groups tonight. Hey, I was just thinking about this, but some of you guys who are watching this, you may not even know who I am. And so my name's Garrett, and I've been working with Jay here at NorthPoint for a little over 2 years now. And normally, when we have this summertime, all of you guys who are now 6th graders, who used to be 5th graders, we would spend all this time together. We'd go to Cascade Falls, the movie theater. We'd go bowling together, and we would have this really big trip where we'd go to an amusement park and then go to a Major League Baseball game with all of you guys, and we would just be getting to know each other that whole time. And obviously that has not gotten to happen this year, but I just wanted to say I'm super excited that you guys are a part of home groups this year. And even though you don't really know me and I may not even know your name, God is so powerful that he can use his truth and his grace through his word to be speaking into our lives, even if we don't even know each other, which is just so cool. And so we get to do that today. But before we do, I wanted to show you guys this awesome patio, and so hang with me. I'm going to kind of give you a tour. If you haven't seen NorthPoint's patio, you got to check it out. We've got all these colors of the rainbow. We got the chairs, we got the benches. Right outside the kids' wing, there's 62nd Avenue, way out there. You know, can't really see the cars, but there were no cars driving by at the time. Okay, that's kind of the 360, and then look at this staple, the staple umbrella. Look at that. Just a massive, I would almost consider this umbrella a tent. Like, I would just call it a tent. That's how massive that really is in it. You can see it's shading this chair, which I'm very grateful for. So hopefully the sound made it during that. It's an interesting setup. We've got my iPhone on this tripod, and then out of the charger cord spot, there's a little microphone that's a really puffy microphone that's just kind of dangling there. So that's our setup. I hope it's working. I think it is working. But we're just excited. We're excited to be with you again. And last week, Jay kind of kicked us off, and he talked about why I am a Christian. And he really mentioned this big major point of God, he's pursuing you. Like, God wants to get to know you. And sometimes we have this misconception that we're gonna go to church, we're gonna pray a lot, we're gonna read our Bibles more, maybe even go to home groups every week so that we can be kind of working our way up to God. That we're gonna get to God eventually. And that's really, God's trying to just dismantle that whole idea. And he's saying, no. You do not come to me. You do not get to me or work your way to me, but I am going to come to you. And God does this through his son, Jesus. God sends Jesus to this earth, and Jesus lives this perfect life that you and that I cannot live. Like, we just can't live this perfect life. We are so messed up. But Jesus, he's not. And he lived a perfect life. He died the death that you and I deserved for our messed up lives. And then he rose again from the grave. And that is so incredible that Jesus rose again. And sometimes we think of that and we're like, yeah, duh. Like, of course, Jesus rose from the grave. I've heard that so many times. I've grown up in church hearing that my whole life. But that is such a big deal. That is such a majorly big deal. We have, in this society, in the world that we live in, we do not have to look far to realize that we are so fearful of death. Even thinking of the coronavirus and this pandemic, we are afraid of dying. And we don't like to see others around us die because we have this fear of what's going to be next and what's going to happen and what about this life? Like, this life is all there is. And God's saying, no, that's not it. There's so much more than this life. There's eternity to look forward to after this life, and I have made a way for you to be with me forever. And that's the gospel. That's God sending Jesus on our behalf to die for us, to make a way for us to be with him. And Jesus, he helped us with the two biggest things that we can't win. We can't beat sin, and we cannot beat death. Yet Jesus has beaten them both for us. And so when we just put our faith and trust and hope in his name, we get to become children of God. And that's the gospel. That is such an amazing encouragement to us. And so I hope that that's happened in your life. And if it hasn't, talk to a leader. Talk to one of the host family people and just ask them more about that. I mean, how can I get to know Jesus? How can I be a child of God? And Jesus, he wants you. God is so pursuing you. And tonight, or today, whenever you're watching this, we're going to keep on talking about why I am a Christian. And today, it's all about freedom. And we love freedom. We think about the United States, and when we see even an American flag or a picture of some soldiers or whatever it may be, we think of this idea of freedom. And it's a big deal to us. And it's a big deal in the Bible too. Way before America and the United States was even a country, freedom was talked about. And so we're going to turn to Galatians chapter 5. And Paul's talking to these new believers these new believers in Galatia, which is why it's called Galatians. And he goes, chapter 5, verse 1, he says this, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free." It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. And we may read that and hear that and we think, well, what in the world does that mean? Like, what is that even saying, that it is for freedom that Christ has set us free? And back in this time, when Paul was writing to these people, this was a letter to these people, he was saying, hey guys, like they had just heard this story of Jesus in the gospel, but there were other people coming in and saying, hey, yeah, you know Jesus and you know what he's done for you and you know that God's been pursuing you, but there's these other things, like you also got to be circumcised and you have to follow this traditional rule and you got to follow this and this and this. And all of a sudden, these two things started to intermingle, and they kind of were you got to do both. And it wasn't just Jesus and the gospel, but it was Jesus plus doing all of these other traditional laws and things. And then Paul saying, no. Like, there's freedom. Like, Jesus is bringing freedom from these things. It's just this. Like, this is the prize. Jesus is the prize. He's the hope. Focus here. And really, there's another beautiful piece to this freedom. But before we get to this piece, before we get to this next part of freedom that I want to just present to you guys, I want us to think about how we think about freedom. That might have sounded confusing, but I want us to think about how we think about freedom. And I'm going to help us with this by, instead of just telling you and defining freedom, like looking up Google definition, what is freedom, I want us to think of these two examples. Option one. Here's option one. You're going to wake up, okay, think of kind of this is like maybe a typical day. You wake up and you got to make your bed, you got to pick up your clothes, okay? And then all of a sudden, once you do a couple chores, then your mom and dad, they're going to let you have your phone or your device, right? You can have that after you do some things. And then you kind of go to school, but instead of bringing your phone into class, you have to leave it in your locker. You got to leave it there because you can't have it in class. And then all of a sudden you get done with that and you go back home, you have dinner tables all set up, you eat dinner, you cannot be on your phone during the dinner table. And maybe some of you guys are like, well, I don't have a phone, so this doesn't apply to me. Well, then we'll just say after dinner happens, you cannot be playing video games, you cannot be doing just whatever you want to do because you don't have your homework done. So homework's got to happen. Homework's got to happen before the fun time happens, before the free time happens, before hanging out with friends, before going back on the screen time. And then when the nighttime comes, you have to make sure you have your device in your parents' room right before 9 p.m. or whatever the time may be, and that's the day. So that's option one. Option two, you wake up and you just don't even make your bed, because why would you make your bed when you're just going to get back into your bed later that night, right? That doesn't make any sense. Same thing with the clothes. You're just going to wear the clothes again. That's kind of gross if you do, but you're just going to leave them on the floor, whatever. And then you go to school, and instead of leaving your phone in your locker, you decide, I kind of want to be on Snapchat during class. And so you bring it into class, and you kind of secretly are on Snapchat. No one really knows, whatever, it's cool, you got away with it. No one really does that, though. Like, no one has their phone in class. It's just an example. And then you get home, and dinner time comes, and you're kind of just whatever on your phone again. Maybe you don't have a phone. You're like, Garrett, once again, this doesn't apply to me. But okay, let's say, forget homework, you get to just do whatever you want after dinner. And a matter of fact, you don't even have a bedtime. You get to just go to bed when you're tired, whenever you want. Like, whenever you get tired, that's your bedtime. And so picture option two. So option one, option two, which one would you say involves more freedom? Probably option two, right? Like, freedom to us, this is kind of how we think of freedom. We think of freedom as whatever I get to decide that I do, that equals freedom. So when I am making more decisions about what I am doing, that's what I think of freedom. And when people kind of put these rules and regulations around what I can do, and when I have a bedtime and when I have rules regarding my screen time, that is not freedom. Like, that's kind of how we think of freedom. And so that can carry into how we think of freedom in the Bible. And what's crazy is when these people were reading about freedom here, they were reading freedom as, wow, like I get to see Jesus as Jesus plus nothing. But yet when we come to freedom and when we look at the Bible, generally speaking, a lot of us, we think of the Bible and we think of Jesus and we think of being a Christian as all of these rules and sets of rules that we have to obey and follow. And really, the Bible kind of prohibits us from being truly free, because it can tell us to do some things and to not do some things that some of us want to do. And so this Bible and this God isn't truly about our freedom. like only we are. And that's kind of the misconception that we have of God's word. And I really want to bring us back. I want to bring us back to the idea that God is really about your freedom. He's about your freedom, whether you realize it or not. And I want you to picture this. I want you to picture a lion, okay? Picture a lion in a zoo, though. So think about the Blank Park Zoo or whatever zoo you want to go to. There's a lion, and he's all caged up. There's fencing all around, and we would look at that lion, and we would say, he's not free. Like, this lion is not free because, obviously, there's all these borders around him, and he can't move outside of this. But you know what? Let's just remove the borders. Let's get rid of the borders, and let's put him in the middle of Antarctica, okay? Like, the lion can go wherever he wants. He can do whatever he wants to do. He can just roam Antarctica, and that's, like, he's going to be free. He's going to be freed from these boundaries, and he's just going to be in Antarctica and roam around. And you would think, Garrett, that's a terrible idea. Why? Because the lion is going to die. Like, Antarctica is going to kill him. And I'd say, well, no, like, he gets to have freedom. Like, this is fine. And you're like, no. The lion needs to be in Africa, right? He needs to be where he is designed to be. And guys, the same thing is true of you and me. You see, when we try to give ourselves freedom, we end up in a place like Antarctica. When we try to get rid of the borders that maybe our parents or maybe that the Bible has tried to place and to try to help guide us in our lives, when we just get rid of those, we're going to end up in a place like Antarctica. And we're going to be dying because of the fake freedom that we think we are pursuing. And this book talks about it. It literally says this. Ready? Stand firm then, right? It says, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. And then in verse 13 of the same chapter, it says, you, my brothers and sisters, you are called to be free. You are called to be free. But do not use your freedom to indulge the sinful nature. And here we have this. Here we have this concept that is true of all of us, that we are messed up people. And we do. We have a tendency and we have a natural tendency to be sinful and to make mistakes. And you think about this. Who taught you to lie? Like, who taught you to be mean to your siblings? Who taught you to yell at your parents? And I hope you don't do that. But no one had to teach you to do those things. Like, no one had to do that. Because you were just born. You were born with this thing inside of you called sin, and you just did those things. And so when you think of this, when you try to create freedom for yourself, you're going to end up in Antarctica enslaving yourself in your own sin, whether you realize it or not. And what God's trying to say is, hey, I want to actually free you from your fake freedom, and I want to give you true freedom. I want to give you redemptive freedom. I want to give you forgiveness. I want to give you forgiving freedom. I want to give you this type of freedom. I want to put you in Africa, if you will. And I don't want you to be living here in Antarctica. And so that's what this is saying. That's what God is saying. He's saying, hey, I care about you, and I want you to have true freedom. And that happens through a relationship with Jesus. Just like how God pursued you, and that happened through Jesus, this biblical freedom, this idea that God doesn't want you enslaved in your own sin, that happens through Jesus too. And so we look here, and it says, my brothers and sisters, you are called to be free. Like, Jesus has offered this to you. This happens through following him. But do not use your freedom to indulge the sinful nature. So in other words, Jesus is not saying, like, hey, I'm giving you freedom, so do whatever you want. No, that's the other freedom. That's the freedom that we don't want. We want what God has said that freedom is. And it continues on, it says, so instead of indulging the sinful nature, rather serve one another in love. The entire law is summed up in a single command, love your neighbor as yourself. And if you keep on biting and devouring each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. And so we have this final encouragement that man, once we grasp this freedom, once we grasp this new life that Christ is offering us, that's designed by him, once we rest in this and realize that the boundaries that God is setting up in our lives, they're for our own good. They're actually to free us from the sinful slavery that we would be caught in if we chase after our own freedom. And these are just completely different. And so God's saying, hey, I want to give you true freedom, not this fake freedom that everyone thinks that they want. I want to give you true freedom. And then once we have this true freedom, God's like, hey, would you just love each other? Would you love your neighbor? Would you just show other people this amazing love that I've shown you? And instead of just beating each other up, and instead of doing the comparison game and bringing people down so that we can elevate ourselves and look better to other people and kind of feed the pride that's within us, Jesus is like, don't do that. God's saying, do not go that way. Like, that's not the way I designed you to live. I designed you to love one another. And when we experience and when we live in the freedom that Jesus offers, then those things will naturally start to happen in our lives where we can love one another. And when we don't have to beat each other down verbally or on social media so that we look better, like that will no longer be a desire for us. And so, guys, that's my prayer for us. That's my prayer for you and for myself, is that we will stop chasing after fake freedom and that we will rest in the true life-giving freedom that Jesus offers. And so I hope the discussion after this goes well. I'm just really grateful once again that you're with us, and we hope to see you again next week.